The Illinois legislature returns next week. They are set to hear Governor J.B. Pritzker's budget address. We'll find out, Illinois taxpayers, how the governor plans to spend your money for the coming fiscal year that begins July 1st. And in the meantime, you've got a primary election in March. Between the start of the budget and the governor's budget address, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But there is a ton of different pieces of legislation being put out. And part of all of that includes different priorities that legislators are putting out there. One in particular is interesting to see as it continues to evolve is whether or not we change our voting system in Illinois to be ranked choice voting. So we'll hear some of what the most recent ranked choice and voting system task force in Illinois had to say. They held their first meeting, and it got off to a bit of a bumpy start because the task force approved with legislation last year. The governor signed. It creates this task force, and there's people, appointed, and you've got members from the Democrats majority in the House and the Senate that are appointed. You've got members from the Republican minority in the House and the Senate that are appointed, and others that are appointed as well. But the co-chairs and the task force law spells out that the co-chairs are to be selected from the appointees from the Senate president, a Democrat, and the appointees of the House Speaker, a Democrat. So the question is this going to be a truly bipartisan look at the possible impacts of ranked choice voting? You're asking yourself, what's ranked choice voting? All right, ranked choice voting is you've got, say, 6 people on a ballot. No party designation, or just 6 people on a ballot. And you choose and you rank which one's your first choice, which one's your second choice, which one's your third choice, so on. And then when they start to tally all of that up, they refine it to be, well, if your third choice didn't get in, then your votes go to the next choice that you had. So that's kind of how ranked choice voting works in a 30,000 foot view. So I don't practically, I'm not sure how it would ultimately play out with timelines and whatnot. But that's what some people want to bring about in the state of Illinois. And they are looking to investigate this and report on this. And they've got a report due sometime next year. And they're hoping to attempt ranked choice voting for, I believe, the 2028 presidential primary. So looking at the calendar here, that would be in about 4 years where we could see ranked choice voting used for that. But they have to go through this task force and all this. But again, the question of whether this is going to be a bipartisan review with certain concerns heard, well, we'll see. The first meeting of the ranked choice voting task force in Illinois started off with people feeling that it was partisan. Again, the co-chairs selected only from the Democrats. And Ryan Spain, a Republican state representative from Peoria, he had some concerns to share right off the bat.
Thank you very much. And no further nominations, but I'll just stop and make a point here, and certainly appreciate and have a lot of respect for Leader Murphy, Chairman West. But it strikes me that this is the exact kind of topic that would benefit from the type of bipartisan leadership that we apply. And I think it works well, whether it's at JCAR or COGFA. And when we're dealing with elections issues like this, it gives a particular emphasis to why bipartisanship should matter. And unfortunately, I think this only serves to enhance some of the suspicion that is lingering out there about the topic of ranked choice voting. So as a result, I'll be voting present on the nominations for Leader Murphy and Chairman West.
So that was, again, State Representative Ryan Spain raising his concerns about partisanship. State Senator Seth Lewis also shared some of his concerns about partisanship.
And I was given assurances that this committee would not be presented that way, but even in the first discussions, it appears that there is partisanship by many members, by some members, in their initial comments. However, I promised I would not create controversy, and I will vote yes.
So we've got that as well moving through. State Senator Laura Murphy, who's one of the co-chairs, she said that there's no partisanship here.
I have to address concerns that, we don't legislate in a partisan fashion. I don't envision this committee would be any different. Or let me say, I don't legislate in a partisan fashion. We encourage input. So I understand some of those that might be a little unfamiliar with our process that we operate in the Senate, but certainly, as Senator Lewis knows, this is going to be a fair, bipartisan, inclusive committee.
So Senator Murphy, a Democrat co-chair, saying, hey, they're going to work in a bipartisan fashion, even though you got the Democrats leading the committee. And this is different than other bipartisan committees that there are at the State House. You've got the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, which we've talked about, is a truly bipartisan committee. It's got equal number Republicans, equal number Democrats. I believe the Legislative Audit Commission has equal number Republicans, equal number Democrats. I believe that the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability has equal number Republicans, equal number Democrats. This is not the case for the Ranked Choice and Voting System Task Force in the state of Illinois. State Representative Maurice West, Democrat from Rockford, another co-chair of the committee, he shared his concerns about those saying that this is partisan.
Members may feel that it seems like it may have started on a partisan level, but I assure you that the conversations that we are having, will be having on ranked choice voting, every member on this team will be valued. Whatever you need to say about ranked choice will be listened and taken into consideration. I too do not like operating in a partisan fashion. I too desire for us to come out of this with some effort from both sides of the aisle. So for those of you who said, I don't know much about you guys to vote, I totally understand. We'll get to know each other because this is an important topic, not just for one party, but for all voters. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation with all of you.
So again, you got Maurice West sharing his thoughts, saying that he doesn't want this to be partisan. He's going to work towards it not being partisan. So we'll see how that plays out. Meanwhile, you've got other measures that are being talked about. Republican State Senator Sue Rezin has a measure where she wants to ultimately require individuals to show social media companies their identification as part of an effort to protect kids. So Senator Rezin, and you'll see the report I posted with thecentersquare.com, saying that Illinois legislators want social media ID. Others saying it's a violation of free speech. So Senator Rezin, with her Safe Screens, Healthy Minds initiative, would practically do a few things. One, it would require that the code in developing social media has high-level privacy settings by default for kids and parents to be able to use in easy spelled-out terms. You've also got the another measure that Senator Rezin wants just in Illinois to have social media companies with a hotline that parents and kids can call if they have concerns. And then the third proposal is a measure that would require anybody using social media to show or somehow have an identification verification process. And this is where you get some civil libertarians like, whoa, hold on a second. So there's a couple of different things that I talked with a policy analyst from the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, David McGarry. He's a policy analyst with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. And he said there's a whole host of things that, number one, need to be addressed, including, some of the proponents of regulating social media to this degree say, hey, there's all these studies about the harm to young people from social media. David McGarry says, well, there's other studies that might point to other problems with that research.
I think that it's like I said, it's a much more nuanced and complicated picture than the folks who want to heavily regulate social media make it out to be. Now, with that as a backdrop, the question becomes how should the government regulate social media, if it should regulate social media? because there's also tension between what are parental rights and responsibilities surrounding making what choices their children, or making choices for their children's media and other consumption habits. And there's a trade-off between the parental rights and responsibilities and the government stepping in to micromanage these things. And one thing that the government has to consider while it is really doing anything is whether or not proposals will accord with the Constitution. And one of the huge problems with age verification proposals, which with many of the age appropriate design proposals, and with some of the other kid safety bills, is that they all, or many of them, tend to run afoul of the First Amendment. They place either impermissible barriers on the speech of all users, or they just blanketly take kids off of social media, which the Supreme Court has said would the Supreme Court has said that children have some sort of First Amendment rights. They're not the same as adults, but you can't simply just remove children's access to broad swaths of speech based on vibes or because you think that there could be some harms that are occurring.
David McGarry goes on to talk a little bit more about some of the different arguments against regulating social media to this degree, but he also delved into the idea of these patchworks, right? If Illinois, or just one little part of landlocked land in the middle of the country, if we have certain regulations in place that are regulating internet, then, you know, you've got what happens in Missouri, what happens in Utah, what happens in some of these other places, because they don't have the same laws. They might have to. Well, I'll just let David McGarry explain it.
Yeah, there's no way for media or technology companies to navigate the patchwork scenario. The internet, as you point out, is international commerce, really, but it's certainly interstate commerce, and having different privacy regimes, having different content moderation regimes, having different kid safety regimes across different states would be costly and disastrous. And I would also note that it would incentivize tech companies to make policies that would comply with the most draconian regimes that are found in the country. So, for example, like there's the famous California effect, right? Where you'll see California come up with some terrible regulation, and then businesses to avoid this patchwork status will simply just comply with California's regulations, which then subjects much of the rest of the country to all the negative consequences of California's regulation. So I do think it's a major concern, and like I said, and I want to stress this, it's not just one patchwork that we would have. It's layers on layers of patchworks, because, as I said, there are privacy regimes that are going to differ between states. There are content moderation regimes that are going to differ between states. We've had states suggest different digital taxation regimes or streaming taxation regimes. Those could differ between states. Kid safety regimes. There is some distinctions between.
So McGarry, he goes on to explain just the different types of regimes that could be stacked on top of each other. But we also talked about the just impacts on free speech. I mean, keep in mind, Abe Lincoln, those history buffs out there, you guys know this, but Abe Lincoln regularly criticized his political opponents in editorials that weren't written by Abe Lincoln. He would use a pseudonym. All right, very similar to if you go on Twitter and you see a bunch of people who have some NPC, you know, face thing. It's obviously not the real name. They just go out there and they troll. All right. Trolling is not necessarily, you know, polite, right? It's not like everybody should troll. People look at trolls in a negative light, but it's still free speech. More from David McGarry.
Certainly. So the issue with age verification is that you've got for the most part, we're looking at one of two methods of age verification. In one case, you would submit a government document, say a scan and ID, And then in the other, you would allow either the platform or some third-party vendor to scan your face to try to determine whether or not you have the facial features of someone who is over whatever the threshold age is. I'm going to leave aside all the data security implications that this would have, because they're many and scary, and they're in a different conversation. But to focus on the First Amendment issues, the First Amendment protects your right to speak anonymously. This is settled law. The Supreme Court, in a case called McIntyre versus Ohio Elections Commission, came out and said this very clearly. Going back to the authors of the Federalist Papers, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, who published under the name Publius, American history is replete with people who have exercised their right to speak anonymously. And while there are certainly many people online who, I think most of us would agree, abuse this right, that doesn't mean that under our constitutional system, the government can come in and make those calls and force people to identify themselves. And while social media platforms are free to adopt their own policies around identity verification and whatnot, for the government to come in and force people to identify themselves in order to speak online, in order simply to exercise a basic First Amendment right, you have a massive and insurmountable constitutional problem on your hands.
So again, David McGarry, he is a policy analyst with the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, and he sounded off and shared some of his thoughts. I do just want to reinforce with those watching live, for some reason, right around this time every morning, despite me boosting the internet speed and paying my internet service provider even more, it seems to drop. I don't know what maybe I should just get on customer service for 40 minutes and wait for somebody to talk to me and tell me why it does that, because it happens a lot. But we do record these segments remotely, so we get those out to you throughout the day. That's why it's important you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. All right, it is Bishop on Air. I'm Greg Bishop. Thank you so much for hanging out with us each and every weekday morning. Starting at about 7:40ish, we go live Central Time, hang out with you, and if you are live with us, you can join the Discord. I would ensure that you do this by going to bishoponair.com or in the video description of the live link, and we can only do this when you're live, all right? So get into the Discord channel. I've got the stage set up, so we'll start that stage, and we'll hear from you next here with Bishop on Air.